loop 1, loop 2, loop 5, loop 10, loop 100, loop 1000, loop 10,000, loop 1 million, loop 1 billion, loop 1 trillion, loop 1 decillion, loop 1 undecillion, loop 1 vigintillion, loop 1 trigentillion, loop Google, loop 1 quadragentillion, loop 1 quinquagentillion, loop 1 sexagentillion, loop 1 centillion, loop 10 to the 1000, loop Googleplex, loop Googleplexian, loop tridecal, loop array 10-10-1-2, loop array 10-10-1-10, loop G64, loop G65, loop GG64, loop tree 3, loop south SCG3, loop tree 4, loop Z function 1 million, loop omega, loop 2 omega, loop 5 omega, loop omega squared, loop omega pentaracted, loop omega to the 10, loop omega to the omega, loop omega to the omega plus 1, loop omega to the 2 omega, loop omega to the 5 omega, loop omega to the 10 omega, loop omega to the omega squared, loop omega to the omega pentaracted, loop omega to the omega to the 10, loop omega to the omega to the omega, loop omega tetrated to 4, loop epsilon naught,